Jennifer Gwyn Jones knows what it feels like to keep pushing down a yearning for change. She knows how easy it is to become constrained by what you can do, what you think you should do. She knows how you can become easily stuck in, it's okay, it's going okay land. But now Jen also knows what it feels like to break free, to be bold and brave and leave a 17-year career to strike out in a new direction that just kept on calling. If you've ever wanted to stop what you're doing now and begin something new, especially if you're currently in a corporate role or other profession, I'm sure you'll get a lot out of this conversation. We're talking about the vital role that self-compassion plays when you step out of your comfort zone, to tapping into your own internal wisdom, how to design a rich full life, and so much more. This is a mini guide to courageous change. I hope you enjoy it. My name is Angela Raspis. I'm a business mentor, author, and self-worth educator. And you're listening to Your Next Chapter, a podcast about change and challenges, goals, and dreams, and the mix of strategy and self-worth it takes to step into the next version of you. Have you ever been in a corporate job, being employed by somebody else, and you're earning a good wage and you're doing good work, but something just doesn't feel completely fulfilling? You start thinking about, what possibilities are there out there in other fields? Could I possibly take the leap and let go and move out into a new future, a new chapter, a next chapter perhaps? Well, the lovely lady that I have here today on our podcast is Jen Gwyn Jones, who did exactly that. And the reason I wanted to bring her on to the show was because I know how many of us have sat there wondering, is there a different future available for me with the way that I do my work in the world? And it's always wonderful to get the inspiration and the inside story of what it was actually like to make such a significant change. So Jen, thank you so much for spending the time here with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Angela. I'm so happy to be here and to talk about all this fun stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Well, one of the things when I was reading through, the background details, a little bit about your story, something that I resonated with immediately was the concept of compassion, of being kinder to ourselves, and how that can make us bolder and braver. And I'd love to hear the part that played when you were considering moving from where you were to where you are. So give us a little bit of that backstory of your previous chapter and then what part that played in that move forward.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with the backstory because compassion didn't come in until later in the piece. So I was in I worked in a government job for about 17 years. And throughout that time, I had bouts of recognizing in myself I had a yearning for something different, but I didn't know what that something was. And I would go through cycles of convincing myself that what I had was okay. I had fantastic jobs. I worked with great people. So it all looked good on paper, but every now and again it would bubble up to the surface, this yearning of something different. I didn't know what the other thing was, which is why I sort of would squash it down, keep on going. And, 17 years later, this yearning had kind of developed into more of a desperation. I was...
it had built to a crescendo, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. My health was starting to suffer and it was really clear to me that something was not right. And it wasn't until I sort of looked back and saw my diaries. I think I was on a Marie Kondo cleaning spree and I found on my own diaries and I saw it in my own words coming back at me, this cycle of wishing something was different, not knowing what that something is and not being brave enough to own that truth in me that what I've got now, even though it looks good on paper, is not right for me. I couldn't own that truth because the uncertainty was too much for me at that time. And so just seeing that cycle of squashing it down, come back up again. And that's when I realized nothing is going to change until I make the decision for it to change. So,
actually, I'll jump in there just for a moment if I can, because one of the things that you just spoke of then is what's so incredibly valuable, and that is the value of journaling of actually keeping journals, keeping diaries. And that was probably one of my light bulb moments as well, when I did take the time to look back and see exactly the same dissatisfactions keep recycling up to the surface again, as you described it, and me going, oh, there it is again, but I'm not ready. Oh, there it is again. But what if it goes wrong? For me, it wasn't leaving corporate, because that was a long time ago, and I sort of left under, it was pregnancy. I was very ill, and all sorts of things happened. Very long story, but that same recycling of the dissatisfaction kept bobbing above the surface, and you keep pushing the bugger down, but eventually you let it go and it goes boom, and it bounces up, through the water again.
Yeah,
so I relate to that entirely.
Yeah. That's a great image. And it's that piece of truth, that the truth that was for me is that even though this is a fantastic job working with great people, it wasn't the right place for me. It wasn't the right fit for me. And that was the truth that took me a really long time to sit in and own. So, health failing, I needed to take a step back, and that's when, the burnout story. So it took some time to heal, and that's when I could have my creativity started to come back online, and that's when I started to explore what, in your word, a new chapter may be. And I gravitated towards coaching. It was part of my healing journey, and because I had a bit more space to think outside the box, I'm not from a family of business owners. We're all sort of corporate or government employees. With that extra space, I could entertain the idea of maybe, oh gosh, I could be a business owner myself. And what would that look like? And in that healing, growing phase, that's when self-compassion really was a great find for me. I am a perfectionist, a type A kind of person, and compassion didn't come naturally to me. I was very compassionate to my friends and family, but when I turned that around and tried to apply it to myself, I liked the idea of it intellectually. I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't know the how of giving myself that compassion. And so I went to the great, the teachers. Christian Neff is, the expert on compassion, and she just breaks it down really simply. And that's where I learned I can access self-compassion even before I've got all my other stuff sorted out. I don't have to be that self-loving guru on the mountaintop. I don't have to have all my ducks in a row. I can give myself self-compassion as I stumble through this whole new journey. And that was a game changer for me.
I remember finding her through Brené Brown. Brené Brown led me to Kristen Neff, who led me to another teacher, and Martha Beck and another teacher. And I love the way which our way showers, the people that we can learn so much from, we may never have even met or spoken to, yet they've laid a path down that we can explore. Now, I want to give you some reassurance, and on all our listeners as well. There's a gorgeous puppy dog in the background, who is, I can see the picture of the puppy dog in front of me. So if you hear the occasional bark, then just consider that's adding to the ambience of this conversation. So I actually want to circle back round for a moment, if I may, Jen, because the concept of burnout comes up for a lot of people when they find themselves committing to a path that isn't a great match for them, that they know in their head and their heart is not going to be the thing long term. But for many reasons, which we'll explore, we keep at it. We're told to soldier on, and we feel that that's what's expected. And how silly would we be to give away such a great career? Were those some of the thoughts that were in your head? And could you give us a description of what was burnout for you? Because I think it's used a lot.
Yes.
But what did it actually mean to you to burn out?
So for me, I can describe it and see the process more clearly on this side of it.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was definitely linked to a really close interweaving of my identity and my performance at work. I had lost somewhere along the way how to have a sense of self-worth without performing at work. And so the constant striving through work, looking for validation outside myself and looking for that sense of belonging and being okay, coming from external people who quite rightly have their own agendas, are, pursuing their own projects. There was no one sort of doing my job, which is to look out for myself and my interests and my way through life. So over the time, it just started to, my energy levels just started to fade away. And then it really started to become front and center with the health issues. So I don't know how much detail you want me to go into there, but I was having some health issues that really just made me sit up and take notice. And my husband was so supportive. And I really have to, take a moment to just thank him, because he was so patient with me as well. Because, of course, he could see, the costs that were that I was bearing with my body and how much I was giving.
Yeah.
And he didn't force me to make any decisions or anything, but it would have been really hard for him to see me continue down this journey when it really feels like a compulsion to keep working when you've lost your anchor in yourself and it's all tied up in work. So I guess thankfully my body tapped out so I could take that time to heal and return back to myself and reconnect with those truths in me, so I don't need to look for validation and a path outside of myself.
Oh my goodness. This makes so much sense. There is so many directions that I could go here in terms of what we can talk about. But I'll jump into one first, which is how incredibly valuable it is to have a belief buddy. Mm-hmm. So to me, a belief buddy is someone who shares your vision, who has your best interests at heart, who supports you, who listens, who gives you a gentle kick up the bum if it's needed. But really, they're on your side. Mm-hmm. And having a belief buddy in the form of your husband was incredibly valuable. And I had one as well in the form of my husband, and I wrote about this in the book, Your Next Chapter, which I wrote last year, that there was this moment when he came back from a big sailing adventure and I picked him up after a full day of juggling kids and my marketing agency and this and that. And he asked me, he jumped into the car and I could see how excited he was and about how brilliant this next chapter was for him. And then he turned around after telling me the story and said, "So how was your day?" And I went, and just like dissolved and just really shared. He'd seen it building up as well, but I was reaching this breaking point. Mm. And I said, "I just don't think I could keep doing this." And he looked at me and he put his hand on mine on the steering wheel and said, "Well, don't." Mm. And I went like, "Oh, that's a choice."
Yeah. Isn't that, you're like, oh, I never thought of that.
No, it's like, oh, duh. No. But so that piece, having a belief buddy, how valuable, but also your recognition of one of the pieces that was really pulling you apart was that relying on that external validation, that needing to strive for somebody else's measures, which weren't the measures for you. Mm-hmm. And recognizing that I have such a fascination with self-worth, and this is such an important piece of it, of recognizing that it needs to come from inside, because the outside pressures are not your agenda.
Mm. And that was, apologies about Bonnie. And that has been part of my journey, is reconnecting and finding what are my anchor points, what are my values to connect with, to guide me, because we have so much freedom. There's so many different ways we can create our life that just acknowledging how much freedom we have can be sort of overwhelming. So I always try and come back and just ground myself in, okay, so what's going to be my value that's driving me in this moment? What is important to me in this moment? And just taking it moment to moment, and trying to return to my truth and make the best decision I can at that time with compassion.
Oh, Jen, you've brought up a really good point. You're saying before that sometimes all of the options can feel so overwhelming. There's a couple of women who are in my orbit at the moment who have exactly that going on. It's like, I've got no idea what I want to do next. I know it's just not this. Mm-hmm. And so it made me curious if you could share, how was it that you got yourself anchored to explore? You were talking about the healing process, giving yourself that space, but how do we actually harness our curiosity and what do we use to help ourselves, look for those options and realize or recognize when something is resonating with us inside? Could you share a little about what your experience was there when it came to choices?
Yeah, it is the thing I keep on returning to again and again, and it's a skill that I'm continuing to develop and get more in tune with. I think it's unique for all of us how those sort of hot tracks show up for each of us of what our path looks like. And when I was coming from burnout, I couldn't answer the question. If you'd asked me, what do you like to do? I couldn't answer that question. I was just totally kaput. So I would suggest starting small, going back to the senses and just starting small. What are some smells that you enjoy? What are some things you like to look at? What are some things you like to touch? Some fabric, some textures, and just slowly get familiar with things that feel nice to your body. Your animal body is how we experience the world. It's how we kind of the nexus between our spiritual higher self and the mundane world that we navigate and make our dreams come through our body, and just step by step slowly get used to what it feels like, feeling that hot track, that spark in you, and what are the things, starting to recognize what are those things that make you light up in that way.
Oh my goodness, I've never heard anyone use that expression that you just did. This body that our dreams come through, as opposed to what's going to make your dreams come true. That is such a beautiful discernment. I love that.
Oh, thank you.
But so I think what I'm hearing here is that it's important to give ourselves permission to explore what feels good to us.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's where it comes down. So it's almost like, I love the expression, where are the hot tracks that we can follow? I mean, you can follow the breadcrumbs, but as we know from the old Hansel and Gretel days, they disappear. Someone can take those away. So let's go for the hot tracks instead. So what are we suggesting here? Reading articles, seeing what examples, like I like the expression of way showers that we spoke of before we hit record, and we share a way shower, which is the lovely Martha Beck. And I've often found, because I rely so much on books, is I can come across books and ideas that really resonate with me and how that person is showing up. And that to me is a part of my hot track. It's like the way they show up, what they're doing, how they're contributing. I'd like to do something similar. It doesn't mean that I have to have all the answers. I just have to have, my perspective. Was that how it was for you?
Yeah, and I can't claim the term hot track. That was from one of my master coaches. But how the hot track feels to you. So getting inspired by others and those people that have gone before us, Martha Beck, that have written the books that inspire us, but also returning back to ourselves because it's so unique for ourselves.
Yeah. So I guess it's recognizing a possibility, and then it's your interpretation of that.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And coming into the body. Does that feel like freedom to you in your body when you start thinking about doing that potential new project, or how does that feel in your body? Does that light you up, or, does that make you feel kind of tighter and a bit more in prison?
Oh, and sometimes it takes us a while to get back in touch with our bodies, doesn't it? We spend so much time, well, I know, speaking from experience, spending so much time in our heads.
Absolutely.
Relearning or almost reintroducing our body to our heads. Was that something that you felt that you experienced?
100%. I was very much a head up person, living from the head up. My body was just here to walk my head around. And it's through my coaching journey and this healing process that I've come to recognize the wisdom and knowledge that is embedded in the body, that is a great addition to the decision-making process. So if you are looking to start a new chapter, look to the mind for, doing the analysis and the pros and cons, but the information and wisdom we have in our body about what maybe feels good, what feels right to us, I find is another really important piece of the puzzle. I definitely don't want to abandon my analytical thinking. Academic background, I love nutting out a problem, but the intangible wisdom that we know in our body helps us find that really sweet path through life.
There was a beautiful woman that I interviewed probably about 3 years ago now, and she described it as leaning into the body barometer. And I went, ooh, that felt juicy. That felt juicy. And that description of, does this feel heavy? Does it feel as though I'm contracting and being constricted, or does it feel light and enticing? And I think we have to practice that, don't we? We have to, and maybe on the little decisions before we utilize it on the big ones, yeah?
100%. And I would encourage people to practice on, what do you want to have for breakfast? Like, practice really small. I'm a big fan of small steps, because it is when we start talking about the bigger decisions, then we can start getting a little bit of fear coming up, like normal fear, because you're going into an unknown space or trying something that means a lot to you. Then fear comes up. But if we practice feeling what feels sweet and true for us on those small decisions, like, what do I really want to have for breakfast today? Then we can still hear that little sweet feeling, even with the fear there. And that's something that I think just practice and experience.
Yeah, so we'll still recognize that sweet feeling even when fear is stomping its feet and raging around the room.
Yeah, because we don't want to not do things just because we're afraid. Sometimes it's wise, but sometimes we want to still go forward.
Well, how much do you think the role of fear of failure versus fear of success? Do you think that those two pieces play an equal role when it comes to people stepping into a next chapter?
An equal role. I'd say probably not blanket across the board. I think fear of failure was probably my constraining point. As a perfectionist, I didn't want to attempt something that had too much uncertainty about it. But as I start to get clearer on my dreams and pursue my dreams, is fear of success coming up?
Another description of it can be fear of visibility. Fear of being seen.
Yeah. And then that's what that's bringing up for me is definitely the importance of that compassion piece. So when you sit in your truth and then show your truth to, your loved ones, or more broadly, if you're going wide with the business, then there's that vulnerability. But if you can have self-compassion and hold a safe space for yourself, that definitely helps create that safety net. Yeah.
Actually, the self-compassion piece, when I was first examining the self-worth angle, which is a huge part of the way that I approach working with clients and myself these days, I first created a thing called the self-worth trilogy, and it was self-awareness, self-compassion, self-belief. Those were the three pieces. And that self-compassion piece about creating that safe harbor for yourself. So even if you do step out of your comfort zone, you start something new, you try something different, even if it doesn't work, you know that you won't berate yourself. You'll take care of yourself. That's how I really see the self-compassion in action. Would you see it in a similar way? Or is there other examples how you feel it works?
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely, there's the two sides to it is the comforting yourself when things don't work out, which sometimes gets that bad rap. Sometimes gets that bad rap of, self-compassion is weak. It'll make you soft. But what it actually does, and this is what the research shows, is that it helps you be bolder, because it's not a critical failure when you do fall short of your own expectations.
So it's an important skill, just like the feeling inwards to what feels sweet and light. It's another important skill when we are expanding into these new possibilities. So you started this search, like, what's going to be next for me? Once you'd been through this healing process and you got curious and you started to look up and out about what's possible, and this idea of coaching came up. What was the motivation behind going down that path?
It was an interesting journey because I could feel my identity sort of starting to shift as I started to open up to the potential of being something other than the corporate employee, which was interesting from the viewpoint of I was kind of like an expert in that world. I knew what I was doing. I was confident. I had some, I guess, form of status. I just was experienced. I ran a team. I knew what I was doing. And then I was, excuse me.
Now, this is the middle part of the conversation that Jen and I are having. And what I need to tell you is that we had to hit the pause button when we were actually recording. And it became actually quite funny to recognize that self-compassion was going to be the most important thing to help us through this phase. And let me explain why. It's a little bit of a laugh when we look behind it. We'd just been talking about, or you've heard earlier in the episode, that her lovely puppy dog had a bit of a bark in the background. Well, then he got louder and louder and louder. And we decided, look, we really have to pause, because not only was that going to change the listening experience for you, the listener, but it was also stressing us both out because we wanted the episode to work really well. And so we paused it, and we've come back in this evening to continue and just had the most marvelous conversation about, isn't it interesting how the universe delivers exactly what we need to experience? Jen, talk about this concept you and I were just chatting about before we hit record again, about one of your Achilles heels is perfectionism, and what happened after we stopped recording the call.
Yeah, well, just first before I launch in, thanks for being so gracious yesterday at the first part, Angela. That was wonderful. So after getting off the call, my perfectionist tendencies, even though I'm a life coach, for goodness sake, my perfectionist tendencies came back with a vengeance. So when I slide back as a perfectionist, I do it perfectly. So I really had all of these stories and the critical voice in my head really playing out quite loudly in my head, because it doesn't make sense. My dog was barking. I can't control that. But regardless, this is where I found myself. I didn't meet my expectations, and my inner critic really took the opportunity to put the boot in. And I found myself going, gosh, even though I'm in this new role of a coach, my old stories from my old chapter are still coming up in my new chapter. But thankfully, I had some tools in my toolkit that I had to sit down and diligently apply. And I was sitting down and feeling those feelings I asked my client to feel. And those, for anyone out there in doubt, those feelings are uncomfortable.
They are, but this is where we have that opportunity to take our own medicine, so to speak.
100%.
It is hard. And I've heard about the concept, and you may have heard it too, about the second arrow. Mm-hmm. By we something goes wrong, something doesn't meet our expectations, something we're disappointed about. That's the first arrow. That's the first piercing, the first pain. But then if we indulge in the second arrow, which is beating ourselves up about it happening, mm-hmm. and about feeling bad about it, then we actually make the situation worse. And this is where the tools come in. And mm-hmm. that first tool is self-awareness, to understand what's going on inside and to recognize it. And then we bring in the self-compassion that we've been talking about so freely on this call. And after that comes in the self-belief. Those are the three pieces in what I call the self-worth trilogy. Yeah. But I think the realization is, it's not as though we get to this, mountain of up the peak of the mountain of self-worth and peacefulness, and I've got it all together now and I'll never have a problem again. That's just not real. That's crap.
Unfortunately, it's not real. Unfortunately.
I know friends and I have said so often, when can we stop having to grow, for goodness sake? Mm-hmm. But the answer is, that's what we're here for, isn't it? That is life experience. It is to grow, to expand out to your edges, to handle things like barking dogs and cranky husbands and sales expectations that don't necessarily hit the mark. There's all sorts of things. And that's where that self-compassion and having the tools to bounce back up. It's not a case of staying up, because that's unrealistic.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing, being kind, and bouncing back up.
Yeah, and I love that, going to the edges. And when I was feeling these feelings, I was trying to be really mindful of exploring what were the feelings that I was actually feeling. Can I get any more specific than just yucky? Or I was probably using some other adjectives that I won't repeat here. But it was definitely important for me to get back in touch with my values. Why is it important for me to sit with these feelings? Why do I want to put myself through this? And that's because this new chapter that I'm exploring, this new path I'm going down, really means something to me. I'm creating something that means something to me. And continuing down this path means going to my edges, going outside my comfort zone. And that's part of the deal. I've signed up for it. As Brene Brown says, it's going in the arena. And I find that quite comforting when I do have those moments. It's like, okay, I'm basically on track because I'm feeling really wobbly at the moment.
I think that's a really important observation to make about yourself. And I actually wrote about that in my book, is that feeling fear and feeling concern, those are great examples of the fact that you are pushing out through a growth edge. No one walks into a next chapter whistling, Dixie, and go, oh, it's a piece of cake. Because the whole thing is that we have to stretch. And when we stretch, it feels uncomfortable. It feels uncomfortable. And that's, again, why self-compassion is important. Yeah. And I love how you also recognized you wanted to identify what you were feeling beyond yuck. And I think having a good, robust emotional vocabulary can really help us as well. Am I feeling cranky, or am I angry, or am I absolutely, just raging? Like, what is it? Get the feeling, because there is a continuum for all feelings. Mm-hmm. And I think we have a lot of personal power if we are able to identify the feelings, get real about what is happening, what's underneath them, and then being able to soothe ourselves and move through them.
That's right. And I find for myself, when I can name the feeling or even just locate it, maybe I can't get super specific about giving it the right adjective, but it feels like anger, it feels like disappointment, and located in my tummy, I'm feeling a tightness in my throat, then I can put a hand of compassion over that part of my body and just hold myself while I feel that uncomfortable feeling. The self-compassion is so important for me to, and I encourage my clients as well, to hold that uncomfortable feeling in this at the same time as bringing up the compassion. So we're not pushing away the uncomfortable feeling. We're bringing up some softness and some compassion to hold that uncomfortable feeling.
And it's that recognition that the only way through is through. You're right. Yeah. We can't avoid it, especially when our inner critic is throwing hand grenades at us.
Yes, it was like that. It's like, what are you doing?
I'd like to come back to a point that you made, which I thought was really important, when you were saying about when you were having this experience, you needed to really reconnect to your values. Mm-hmm. And I think you and I have a similar experience and background here with ACT, acceptance, commitment training, or therapy, depending on what way in which it is learned. And that, I love the understanding with ACT, which is that crap's going to happen. Things are going to happen. Yeah. But here are your values. So we want to diffuse or detach from the feeling that could overwhelm us by reminding ourselves of why we're doing this. Can you talk a little more to that? Because I think ACT is just fabulous.
I know. I love it. It just makes so much sense. And one of the sayings I came across through ACT is that we hurt where we care. So when we start going after things that have meaning to us, when we're starting a new chapter, or taking our dream off the shelf and trying to make it happen, or trying to tell our story on a podcast with the dog barking in the background, these are things that we care about, and tender nerves kind of feelings are exposed. And if it doesn't go well, then that's when we can in the inverted commas, suffer. We bump up against uncomfortable feelings. But the converse of that, I could try and avoid ever feeling uncomfortable feelings and make my life really, really small, stay inside my comfort zone. But that is a 100% failing strategy, because I'm human. I will, if nothing else goes wrong, I will get sick and die one day. So that's guaranteed to fail. So it's much better to accept our humanness, and that part of the human experience is a whole gamut of feelings and emotions, and that if we can arm ourselves with tools to navigate the more uncomfortable feelings, we are priming ourselves for a really rich and meaningful life, and we can do it on our own terms.
And isn't that what life is all about? To have those experiences, to look back and feel, or to actually, as you're going through it, for it to be a rich experience, a deep experience, an expansive experience, a fun, a challenging, a scary, an exciting, throw all of those emotions and experiences into the mix. And that, to me, is the epitome of a rich life. I can see why you're so, with this new chapter, so drawn towards coaching, because it's something that resonates with you. I can hear it in your voice, and it feels like such an exciting new chapter for you.
Well, thank you. It is. And, coming across things like ACT, when you learn them, and the lady I learned coaching off, Martha Beck, it's like when they share something with you, it just feels so, it's like, oh, that is so, did I always know that? It just sort of, and I'm just realizing it now, there's some really great guidance out there, and I feel very lucky to be able to really explore this path and embrace it the way I have.
That's beautiful. It sounds as though the example you just gave is when you're recognizing a truth.
Yeah.
When you recognize the truth, and we can all have those moments, and that's when those are sort of lighting up the pathway that we're moving down towards and into the expansion that is the next chapter.
Yeah.
So, my darling, it's been a delight, and I'm so pleased that we paused in the middle there and actually got real about what happened, because behind the scenes of every polished podcast or whatever the thing may be, there's a lot of stuff going on that you don't expect. I think it's quite dangerous to look at judge your insides by other people's outsides. I know a lot of people have gone looking at a website and made all these sort of decisions about, why am I even bothering? Because look at that, and she must be doing so well, etc., etc. I've seen behind the scenes of loads of beautiful businesses since I've been mentoring for, many, many years now. And the outsides and the insides don't always match up. So that comparison trap can be really dangerous. So I think it is even more important for whenever you have the opportunity to speak truth, like we did today, which is what I really valued, the opportunity for us to lift the curtain, introduce the dog.
Yes.
And let people know what was going on.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I've enjoyed it. It's been so much fun.
It has been. Well, I love to ask all of my guests, because we're building a next chapter inspiration playlist, if there is a song that we should add to that. And because I feel you're probably pretty much into books, just like me, if there is a book or two that you might like to share as well, we'll put these on the podcast page, but it's great to hear them here as well.
Okay, awesome. I love this question. Well, a few months ago, an old classic. I heard an old classic with brand new ears. It's the Beyond the Yellow Brick Road by Elton John, but it's by a lady called Yola, Yola. And it was at a time when I was reflecting on a direction for my business, and there's this line that says, I've finally decided my future lies beyond the yellow brick road. And those words, I've finally decided, that just hit me like a ton of bricks. I heard it with brand new ears, and it's like, yeah, this is a decision. This is my decision, and I'm making it. My life is beyond, and the yellow brick road for me was the cookie cutter way of living and the cookie cutter way of doing things, and just that decision. I still get chills when I think about it.
So you love how suddenly words can just leap out and have so much meaning. And I think the word finally is a really important one, because I've seen and experienced lots of people who think about it. It's in this in the middle part of the story the discombobulation area of will I, won't I, will I, won't I, will I, won't I. And I've finally decided that my future lies beyond the yellow brick road. Perfect. Yeah. That one's definitely going on the list. And how about a book, my darling?
A book? Well, I am always an advocate for Martha Beck's work, and she's just released a new wonderful book, The Way of Integrity.
Yes.
So that's looking at bringing your body, mind, soul, spirit into alignment with your truth and your version of the truth. So it's not integrity as maybe the broader society we've come to think of it, which is like, you know, saying, keeping your word and da-da-da, which is all good stuff. This is knowing your truth and then living it to the best of your ability. And she's an amazing writer and she's an amazing person.
She is an incredible writer. That book's actually on my side table right now. I have just begun reading it and I'm loving it because I'm a huge fan of her combination of wisdom and wit. She puts them together so well. She makes me burst out laughing at some of the observations she makes and then sit there wowing at some of the others. So it's a really joyful combination.
Absolutely. Yeah, we hit the nail on the head there. Yep.
We'll have to compare notes when we've finished reading it for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you, my darling, and again for coming back the second time, you know, because it's not always easy to pick up where you drop off, but everything you've shared with this encouragement for us to go beyond our own yellow brick road is exactly what others need to hear. It's the power of example of sharing a real story, and that's what you've done for us, so I really appreciate your time.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much, Angela. I love sharing this with you. Thank you.
You're welcome. And to you, our lovely listener, did you enjoy that little insight that in the middle, things didn't go as according to plan? And that will happen to you when you are stepping out on beyond your own yellow brick road. Not everything's going to go according to plan, but if you can pick yourself up, dust yourself off, envelop yourself in self-compassion and recognize that it's okay to stumble. No one gets it perfectly right all the time. You know, those famous people didn't wake up one morning looking fabulous and ready to take on the world. There's step after step after step. And as long as we are moving towards something that's important to us, something that allows us to contribute and to feel fulfilled and to have financial rewards, then stumbling is fine because we learn, and so many next chapters are built upon skinned knees that we've found a way through, and we now have the opportunity to share those insights with others. So go forward, find your own yellow brick road, leap over it, and start just a little step into your next chapter today. And until we next speak, take very good care.